a decorated soldier arrives unannounced at a powerful CEO's office, carrying a final letter from a fallen comrade who once worked for her. His visit forces her to confront painful choices from her past and the emotional fallout of a relationship she abandoned in pursuit of ambition. As the soldier reveals the depth of his friend's sacrifice and the weight of a dying wish, the CEO is pushed into a journey of truth, vulnerability, and long-avoided reckoning. Together, they follow the trail left by the fallen soldier, one that challenges identity, loyalty, and the cost of buried emotions. Rain hammered against the glass walls of Holt Dynamics International as Captain Daniel R. Mercer stood motionless in the lobby, his uniform soaked, his heartbeat steady, his purpose heavier than the storm behind him. Executives rushed past without noticing the soldier, who looked as though he'd walked out of a war film and into their polished world. Yet Daniel wasn't there for spectacle. He carried a single folded letter inside his breast pocket, a letter written by someone whose voice no longer existed. And today, that voice would speak through him, whether the CEO wanted to hear it or not. Security hesitated, unsure whether to approach him, but Daniel stepped forward before they could decide. He asked to see Alexandra Holt, the woman whose decisions shaped empires and whose schedule never bent for anyone, least of all unannounced visitors soaked by the November rain. But Daniel's voice carried a gravity that made the guard lower his radio. Something in the soldier's eyes, some mix of grief, endurance, and quiet fire, suggested this wasn't a business request. It was something older, heavier, carved from sacrifice. And though no one understood why, every person nearby felt the air shift when he spoke that day. Upstairs, Alexandra Holt stood in her corner office overlooking the city, reviewing quarterly figures that showed record-breaking growth. Her world thrived on metrics, profit margins, acquisition strategies, risk forecasts, yet nothing in her meticulous agenda predicted a drenched soldier asking for a meeting without explanation. When her assistant informed her, Alexandra almost refused. She didn't entertain theatrics or dramatic gestures meant to stir sympathy. But the assistant's voice wavered, describing the soldier's unyielding stillness, and something within Alexandra paused. Power demanded decisiveness, but curiosity, real, inconvenient curiosity, whispered that turning him away might alter something she couldn't quantify in ways she never imagined before. Minutes later, Daniel stood before the elevator doors, the sterile metallic surface reflecting the storm-soaked man he had become since returning home. He felt the familiar tension beneath his ribs, the ache of memories that never loosened their grip. The elevator chimed, opening like a gateway to decisions that couldn't be undone. As he rode upward, he recalled the promise he'd made beside a desert road under a burning sky, the promise sealed in dust and blood. He breathed slow, steadying himself. This wasn't about anger. It wasn't about blame. It was about honoring the final wish of someone who saved. Alexandra expected a plea for money, a veteran seeking compensation or opportunity, but when Daniel entered her office, he did not sit, did not shift, did not tremble. He simply reached into his breast pocket and unfolded the weathered letter with ceremonious care, as though its edges might crumble. Alexandra studied him, his rigid posture, the quiet storm inside his gaze. She noticed his left hand trembled once, barely perceptibly, before he steadied it. Whatever this was, it held history. And consequences. She gestured for him to speak, unaware that the next few minutes would challenge a belief she'd held long. Daniel placed the letter on her desk without pushing it toward her. He waited as Alexandra pulled her glasses lower and began reading the careful handwriting that already told her this message had been written by someone disciplined, deliberate, and possibly dying. Her eyes scanned the first lines, and her breath thinned. Whoever wrote this had known Alexandra personally. The letter referenced a decision she'd made years ago during a corporate restructuring, a decision she'd justified logically, efficiently, without looking back. Yet someone had carried that decision into a battlefield. Daniel watched her, knowing the storm was only beginning now. Thunder cracked outside as Alexandra reread the final paragraph, her pulse quickening despite the controlled expression she maintained. The letter spoke of friendship, of loyalty forged under fire, of a sacrifice that never made the news. It revealed that the writer had once worked under Holt Dynamics before joining the military, believing in the values the company claimed to uphold. And in their final days, this soldier had written one request, one favor Daniel was now delivering. Alexandra blinked, tension gathering behind her ribs, realizing that this drenched stranger wasn't asking for himself. He was fulfilling a dying man's last hope. Alexandra set the letter down, her fingers still curled slightly, as though the words had left a physical weight behind. She lifted her gaze to Daniel, searching his expression for anger, expectation, or accusation, but found only a steady quietness, the kind carried by someone who had stood on the edge of mortality too many times to waste energy on blame. His restraint unsettled her. Power she understood. Rage she understood. But sincerity, unyielding, unadorned sincerity, was something else entirely. She inhaled slowly and asked the question that had already formed like a stone in her throat. "What exactly do you want?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket and removed a small metal tag, dog tags worn down by sun, grit, and time. He placed them gently beside the letter. Alexandra stared at the worn engraving, the name striking something deep within her memory. She touched the cold metal, and suddenly the office felt smaller, the storm louder, the years shorter. Daniel spoke finally, his voice low and deliberate. What he needed wasn't money, wasn't opportunity, wasn't absolution. It was a single act that would demand something far rarer from Alexandra Holt, vulnerability in a way she feared deeply. The storm outside softened to a distant rumble as the room fell still, suspended between past decisions and present consequences. Daniel's presence felt less like an intrusion and more like a reckoning years in the making. Alexandra sensed that whatever favor he was about to request would touch a wound she'd buried beneath success and strategy. And yet, she also sensed something else, an invitation to confront the truth she had dodged. As Daniel prepared to speak, the city lights flickered across his uniform, casting shadows that looked like echoes of battlefields far from this pristine office, far from mercy now. The air inside Alexandra Holt's office felt charged, as if the storm outside had seeped through the glass and settled between the two people facing one another. Daniel Mercer stood unwavering, the faint hum of distant thunder tracing the edge of his silhouette. Alexandra waited, fingers interlaced tightly enough to turn her knuckles pale. The letter, the dog tags, both lay between them like evidence in a trial she never knew she'd one day face. The silence lengthened, not empty but taut, brimming with the weight of unspoken histories. Suspense curled through the room like smoke, impossible to ignore. Daniel finally spoke. The man who wrote that letter, Corporal James Alder, wasn't just a fellow soldier. He was a friend. A brother. Someone who died believing he had unfinished business here. His voice was steady, but Alexandra heard something beneath it, a buried tremor, not weakness but heartbreak forged into steel. She didn't interrupt. She wasn't sure she could. Her composure, normally unshakable, felt brittle. She'd chosen efficiency over empathy years ago. Now those choices had come back embodied in a soldier's quiet determination. Corporal Alder worked for Holt Dynamics before he enlisted, Daniel continued. He admired you. Believed in what this company claimed to stand for. He told me that when he left for deployment, it was with the conviction that he was defending the ideals your company taught him. Daniel paused, letting the irony settle, sharp and cold. But when Holt Dynamics shuttered his division, it uprooted families. People lost jobs. Futures changed overnight. You justified it as necessary. He tried to believe that. His words were neither accusation nor condemnation. They were a recounting, stark as a battlefield report. Alexandra's heartbeat quickened. She remembered the restructuring, the numbers, the graphs, the boardroom debates. She remembered justifying the layoffs as strategic optimization. What she didn't remember was the face of any single person affected. Now one of those faces stood before her in memories, carried in Daniel's voice, in the letter that pierced deeper than any quarterly loss ever could. She swallowed hard, unsure if Daniel noticed the subtle falter in her breath. He did. Of course he did. Soldiers notice everything. James saved my life, Daniel said, stepping closer to the desk. We were ambushed outside a small village. Our unit split under heavy fire. I went down. He pulled me behind cover and took a hit that was meant for me. I survived. He didn't. Alexandra exhaled sharply, a sound she rarely let escape, the kind born of shock rather than choice. Daniel wasn't embellishing. His tone carried the chilling stillness of someone who'd relived the moment night after night. The storm outside cracked again, punctuating the truth with a flash of white that illuminated Daniel's scarred knuckles. Alexandra couldn't look away. Every instinct she cultivated in boardrooms, control, analysis, detachment, slipped beneath the gravity of Daniel's story. "In his last hours," Daniel said, "James wrote that letter. And he made me swear I would deliver it. He believed you needed to understand something he never had the chance to tell you in person." Daniel's eyes locked with hers, and for the first time in years, Alexandra felt the ground beneath her confidence shift. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning threaded with the last breath of a man she had unknowingly affected. Daniel reached into his pocket and took out a small notebook, edges frayed, pages worn thin by dust and time. He opened it to a folded scrap inside. "This," he said quietly, "is the favor he asked of you." Alexandra hesitated before reaching for it. Her fingers brushed the paper, and a strange chill ran up her arm, like touching the past made manifest. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, written by someone fighting not just pain but time. Her throat tightened. She read the words once, then again, and again, slower, trying to reconcile what she saw with the fortress of logic she had always lived inside. The letter asked for something she never imagined, a deeply personal request, one that pierced her carefully maintained distance from anything resembling vulnerability. "He wanted this," she whispered, unable to disguise the tremor in her voice. Daniel nodded. "He believed it mattered. He believed only you could do it." Alexandra set the paper down, tension tightening across her shoulders like armor reforming under pressure. "Do you understand what you're asking?" she asked. "Do you understand what that would imply for the company, for me?" But Daniel did not flinch. "Yes," he said. "And I told him I'd make sure you heard him out." The storm outside surged, wind rattling the glass like a warning or a dare. Alexandra rose from her chair, pacing to the window. The city lights blurred through the rain, distorted reflections of the empire she commanded. She'd built her life around unassailable resolve, clean decisions, efficient separations between principle and pragmatism. But this request, this dying wish, was neither efficient nor pragmatic. It was human, and humanity was the one terrain she avoided with precision. She closed her eyes, the weight of the moment pressing into the edges of her composure. Daniel remained silent, giving her space yet reminding her, simply by presence, that time was not infinite. The favor James Alder sought demanded courage, not the kind measured in hostile takeovers or shareholder votes, but the kind measured in truth, in choosing to confront what most people avoided. Alexandra turned back toward him, her expression a fractured blend of fear and defiance. Why didn't he ask for forgiveness? Or compensation? Or justice? She asked. Why this? Daniel answered gently. Because he believed you still had the capacity to care. And he believed that if you completed this one act, it might change more than just your conscience. The room stilled again, quieter than before, more dangerous in its silence. Alexandra looked at the scrap of paper once more, the words inside cutting through her assumptions like a blade of clarity. She felt her pulse pounding in her wrists, her throat, her temples. This was no simple favor. This was a fault line opening beneath her life. And Daniel, steady as stone, was the messenger standing at its edge. The suspense in the room coiled so tightly it felt combustible, like truth waiting for the spark that would ignite everything. Alexandra inhaled sharply. If I agree, she said slowly, everything changes. Daniel nodded. Yes, he replied. That's the point. The office felt colder now, as though the storm had seeped through the very foundation of the building and settled into the carpet, the corners, the polished edges of Alexandra Holt's meticulously curated world. She stood framed by the towering windows, her silhouette carved against a backdrop of trembling city lights. The scrap of paper, the dying wish of Corporal James Alder, remained on her desk like an ember that refused to extinguish. Daniel Mercer waited, posture rigid, heart steady, though a flicker of uncertainty traced the edges of his breath. Suspense hung between them, a taut emotional tether stretched close to breaking. Alexandra reread the request, each word a slow unraveling of her carefully constructed life. It wasn't a grand favor. It wasn't even one that required public attention. It was personal, devastatingly personal. James wanted her to meet someone. To speak truth to a person Alexandra had meticulously avoided, someone she had pushed out of her life long before corporate pressure carved her into the hardened figure she had become. The request was simple. Tell her the truth. Tell her why Alexandra disappeared when she was needed most. Tell her what James had witnessed, about Alexandra's strength, her fear, and the choices she buried under ambition. For years, Alexandra had avoided the name written in trembling ink. Years spent pretending that chapter no longer existed. Now a dying man was asking her to excavate it. Daniel watched her expression shift, professional calm cracking to reveal the face of someone grappling with a truth she never expected to confront again. Her jaw tightened. Her fingertips pressed into the glass desk. "He had no right," she whispered, though the bitterness in her tone was not aimed at James but at the ghost of her younger self. "He didn't know what happened." Daniel stepped forward. "He knew enough," he said gently. "He knew she deserved to hear it from you." Alexandra's eyes narrowed, defensive instinct rising, but Daniel didn't recoil. He'd spent years facing conflict far deadlier than discomfort. He wasn't afraid of her power, nor her silence. Still, he respected the wounds that trembled beneath her composure. The truth, Daniel continued, was the only thing he carried into his final hours. He believed it mattered more than anything. Alexandra let out a sharp breath, turning back to the window as though the city might offer an escape. But there was no escaping this. Not anymore. Not with the weight of a soldier's sacrifice and a dying man's plea pressing against her conscience. "Do you know what you're asking?" she murmured, voice low. "I'm asking you to honor him," Daniel replied. "But at what cost?" Daniel hesitated. "Some truths cost us, but they also free us." She stiffened, those words striking a place she kept locked. She'd built her empire on efficiency, not vulnerability. But James Alder, in his final moments, had decided that Alexandra Holt needed to confront something she had no interest in facing. The irony was cruel and inescapable. Daniel reached for the worn notebook again, opening it to a page where James had scribbled thoughts meant for no audience except the future. "He wrote this 2 days before the mission that killed him," Daniel said. "He was thinking about you. About her." Alexandra didn't turn around. Not at first. But something in Daniel's tone, something fragile, reverent, pulled her back. She faced him, slow, measured, as though preparing herself for impact. Daniel read softly, "She carries her power like armor. But armor isolates. One day she'll have to choose whether to protect herself or let someone else in. If I don't make it back, tell her this, she's not alone. Not unless she chooses to be." The words sliced clean through her defenses. Alexandra blinked once. Twice. Her closing breaths sounded unsteady. "He wrote that," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "He believed you were capable of more than the person you'd become." She turned away again, but this time her shoulders trembled. Not a visible shake, just enough for Daniel to sense the internal fracture. For a long moment, she said nothing. The storm softened to a patter against the glass, as though offering mercy. The fluorescent lights hummed quietly overhead. Every sound felt amplified by the tension that stretched between them. Finally, Alexandra forced herself to speak. "I left her," she said, barely audible. "I walked away when she needed me. I couldn't handle the weight of what she asked." Her voice thickened. "And I convinced myself that burying it was easier than admitting I'd failed someone I loved." Daniel remained still, letting her words settle in the room without judgment. "I chose work," Alexandra continued. "Chose ambition. Chose the kind of safety that comes from control. And in doing so, I lost the only relationship that ever mattered before my name meant anything." She laughed once, a brittle sound. "I've avoided her for years. And James believed I could undo all of that with a conversation." "He believed you could be honest," Daniel said. "And what if I can't?" she replied. Daniel's gaze softened. "You can. Or you wouldn't be standing here wrestling with this." Silence pulsed through the office again, but no longer cold. It vibrated with the beginnings of transformation, a shift neither of them fully understood yet. Daniel continued, "James talked about her often. He admired how deeply she loved you, even after you pulled away. He thought the two of you were proof that loyalty wasn't just something we found on the battlefield." Alexandra flinched, a truth she had spent years outrunning now staring back at her in devastating clarity. "He believed," Daniel said gently, that if anyone deserved the truth, it was her. Alexandra gripped the back of her chair, as though grounding herself. Her voice, when she found it, was barely a whisper. "I don't know if she'll want to see me." "She will," Daniel said. "People who love deeply rarely close the door forever." She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just a soldier but a man carrying the loss of someone he loved as fiercely as she once loved the person James wrote about. Their grief intersected silently, a bridge built from different worlds but the same ache. "Where is she?" Alexandra asked, her voice trembling against the weight of decision. Daniel stepped closer, the faintest relief flickering across his face. "Not far. James made sure I knew how to find her." Alexandra inhaled, her breath shallow. "If I agree to this, if I face her, there's no going back." Daniel nodded. "That's the point." She closed her eyes, feeling the ground shift beneath the fortress she'd built. And when she opened them, something in her expression had changed, still fearful, but braver than before. "Then take me to her," Alexandra said. And in that moment, something long buried began to break open, shaping the path toward truth, toward courage, toward the reckoning that would define everything that came next. Dawn crept over the city like a slow confession, brushing pale light across the rooftops as Alexandra Holt followed Daniel Mercer through quiet streets far removed from the glass and steel towers that had long defined her world. The ride had been silent, heavy with anticipation. Now her footsteps echoed softly against the pavement, each one a reminder that she was walking toward a truth she had buried beneath years of ambition. Daniel led her to a modest townhouse lined with wind chimes that stirred faintly in the morning breeze, their fragile melody trembling like her heartbeat. He paused at the gate, turning to her with a solemn nod. "She's inside," he said. "Take your time. I'll wait out here." Alexandra's pulse hammered beneath her ribs. Her throat tightened. The name written on James Alder's dying request drifted through her mind, stirring memories she had tried for years to banish. Elena. The woman she once loved with a fierce, disarming purity. The woman she had abandoned when fear eclipsed vulnerability. Alexandra breathed in slowly, the cool morning air sharp in her lungs. She stepped toward the door, lifting her hand to knock, but hesitated. Doubt surged through her. What if she wasn't welcome? What if time had turned love into resentment? What if this meeting unraveled her life in ways she couldn't mend? Still, she knocked. The door opened a moment later, revealing Elena Rivera, older than Alexandra remembered, softer around the edges, eyes lined with a grief she carried with quiet dignity. Her dark hair, once long and wild, now fell in a controlled wave. She wore a simple sweater, her presence gentle yet grounded. For a long heartbeat, neither woman spoke. Recognition flickered between them like a fragile flame, illuminating years of distance. Elena's breath caught, her expression faltering between surprise and guarded restraint. "Alexandra," she whispered, disbelief threading through her voice. What are you doing here?" Alexandra swallowed, fighting the instinct to retreat. "I'm here because I owe you the truth," she said, her voice low but steady. "Because someone insisted I give it to you." Elena blinked, confusion deepening. "Someone?" Alexandra stepped aside, revealing Daniel at the gate. "He carried a message," she said softly. "From James." Elena's breath shuddered. "James," she repeated, her voice cracking. "He didn't make it home, did he?" Alexandra shook her head gently. "No. But he made sure his final words reached the right people." Elena's eyes filled with sudden, luminous sorrow. She opened the door wider. "Come inside," she murmured. "Both of you." Daniel shook his head. "I'll wait here. This is for you too." Alexandra entered the quiet home, the air warm with the scent of chamomile and wood polish. She stood rigid near the doorway, unsure where to place her hands, her breath, her guilt. Elena motioned to the living room. "Sit," she said softly. "You look like you haven't slept in years." Alexandra almost smiled, but grief tightened her face. She sat on the couch while Elena eased into the chair opposite her. A fragile silence stretched between them before Elena finally spoke. "Why now?" she asked. "Why after all this time?" Alexandra stared at her hands. "Because James asked me to tell you what I never had the courage to say." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, pained curiosity surfacing. "What did he want you to tell me?" Alexandra inhaled sharply. The truth pressed against her, heavy as stone. "He wanted me to tell you why I left," she said. "And what it cost me." Elena's breath hitched. She leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees. "I spent years wondering," she whispered. "Was it something I said? Something I did? You walked out without warning, without explanation." Alexandra felt heat rise behind her eyes. "It wasn't you," she said. "It was fear. I was terrified. Of vulnerability. Of losing control. Of loving someone who saw me so clearly it felt like standing without armor." She looked up, meeting Elena's gaze. "I chose my career because it felt safer than choosing my heart. And when my company was on the verge of collapse, I ran from everything that felt uncertain, including you." Elena exhaled shakily. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "You broke me," she said quietly. "I spent months trying to understand how someone who claimed to love me could disappear like that." Alexandra nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "I know. And I've carried that guilt every day." A tear slid down Elena's cheek. "Why would James care about this?" "Because he believed truth mattered," Alexandra said. "He believed you deserved it. He believed I was still someone who could face what I ran from." Elena's gaze softened at the mention of James, sorrow shimmering in her eyes. "He was a good man," she murmured. "He used to come by after you left. Asked if I needed anything. Sometimes we talked about you." Alexandra stiffened. "About me?" Elena nodded. "He said you were good at heart, even if you were scared of your own emotions. He said you weren't a lost cause." A painful, bittersweet warmth pooled in Alexandra's chest. She blinked away rising tears. "He saved Daniel's life," she said quietly. "And with his last breath, he asked me to make peace with my past. To come here. To tell you the truth." Elena folded her hands in her lap, breath trembling. "So this is closure." Alexandra hesitated. "It can be," she said. "Or it can be a beginning. If you want it to be." Elena's eyes widened, surprise flickering through them. "Alexandra." Alexandra leaned forward, voice shaking. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to know I never stopped caring. I just didn't know how to stay." For a long moment, Elena didn't speak. Then she reached out slowly, placing her hand over Alexandra's trembling one. The touch was gentle, familiar, devastating. "You hurt me," Elena said softly. "But I never stopped wishing you'd come back." Alexandra's breath broke. A quiet sob escaped her. Elena squeezed her hand. "We don't have to decide anything today," Elena whispered. "But we can start with honesty. That's enough for now." Alexandra nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Outside, Daniel watched through the window, a faint smile softening his grief. James Alder's final wish was unfolding in quiet, fragile truth. And for the first time in years, Alexandra felt the faint, profound stirrings of redemption. The sun had climbed higher by the time Alexandra stepped out of Elena's townhouse, her breath shifting from trembling constraint to something steadier, still fragile, but no longer fractured. Daniel waited by the gate, leaning against the iron railing, posture relaxed yet vigilant, as though guarding not just the space but the emotional ground she had crossed inside. When she closed the door gently behind her, he straightened. Alexandra walked toward him slowly, each step loosening a weight she had carried for years. Her eyes were red, her voice raw, but there was a quiet light there now, a fragile dawn after a long, punishing night. Daniel met her halfway. "How did it go?" he asked softly. Alexandra inhaled, then exhaled with a tremor that sounded almost like relief. "It was harder than I expected," she whispered. "And more healing than I deserved." She looked back at the townhouse, the soft curtains shifting in the morning breeze. She listened. She didn't have to, but she did. Her voice wavered. "That alone feels like a mercy I can't fully comprehend." Daniel nodded with the knowing gaze of someone who had spent years reconciling with losses and salvaged moments. "James believed she'd hear you. He always said she carried more grace than most people realized." A bittersweet smile touched Alexandra's lips. He was right. About her, and about me. She paused. He believed I could still be the kind of person I was before ambition swallowed me whole. She blinked away rising tears. I'm starting to believe him. Daniel shifted, the faintest shadow of grief crossing his face. He saw things in people, he murmured. Sometimes more clearly than they saw in themselves. Alexandra studied him for a long moment. The quiet pain behind his eyes wasn't something he showed often, but now it stood at the forefront, grief threaded with gratitude. She stepped closer. He loved you, she said softly. It's in everything he wrote, in how he spoke about you. You know that, right? Daniel's throat tightened. He looked away briefly, jaw flexing. We were brothers, he said. Not by blood, but by choice. And sometimes that's stronger than anything else. He swallowed. Losing him, it felt like losing part of myself. Alexandra placed a gentle hand on his forearm. You honored him, she said, in ways most people never have the strength to. You carried his last wish across continents, through grief, through doubt. You carried him here. Daniel blinked, his breath thickening. I just did what he asked, he whispered. What I owed him. No, Alexandra replied softly. You did what love required. A silence followed, soft, reverent. The wind rustled through the wind chimes again, their delicate tones drifting above the two of them like a quiet benediction. Daniel cleared his throat. There's something else, he said. In the notebook. A page I didn't show you. Not because it wasn't meant for you, but because it was meant for both of us. Alexandra's brows furrowed. Daniel reached into his jacket, retrieving the weathered notebook that had survived dust storms and firefights, its pages carrying the heartbeat of a man gone too soon. He opened to a page folded inward, a page marked by sand along its edges. He handed it to her. Alexandra unfolded it carefully. James's handwriting, though shaky, carried unmistakable intention. If you're reading this, then the mission ended without me. Don't mourn me longer than necessary. Live the life I couldn't. Daniel, find peace in the places you fear the most. Alexandra, don't let the world convince you that caring is a weakness. You both carry wounds. Don't let them turn you colder. Warmth is what makes people remember us. Warmth is legacy. If you meet together, know this, I trusted you both with the truth. I hoped it might heal more than just my memory. The words struck with the force of a revelation, the final piece of a soldier's last effort to stitch broken lives back together. Alexandra pressed the paper to her chest, tears gathering once again. Daniel looked skyward, blinking rapidly, jaw tightening as he exhaled a trembling breath. Neither spoke for several moments. The silence carried a solemn reverence, as if James himself stood between them, smiling in quiet triumph. Finally, Daniel asked, What will you do now? Alexandra considered the question. She turned the notebook page over in her hands, feeling its fragile weight. I don't know yet, she admitted. But I know what I won't do. I won't keep living behind armor. She gazed toward the townhouse. I'm going to rebuild what I destroyed. Not perfectly. Not quickly. But honestly. Daniel nodded slowly. And the company? Alexandra exhaled. I think it's time Holt Dynamics remembered its humanity. Numbers aren't enough anymore. James believed in the values we claimed to uphold. I want to make sure those values actually mean something. Daniel smiled, a small, genuine expression warmed by approval. He'd be proud of that. And you? Alexandra asked gently. What will you do now that you've fulfilled your promise? He looked down at the dog tags hanging around his neck, James's tags, worn and scratched, still carrying the echoes of battlefields. I think, he whispered, I think I need to stop surviving and start living. James wouldn't want me anchored to grief forever. Alexandra nodded. Where will you go? He shrugged lightly. Wherever healing leads. Maybe stay in the city for a while. It feels like there's something here worth exploring. She offered him a soft smile. If you ever need anything, she said, you know where to find me. Daniel returned the smile, quiet but sincere. I do. They shared a final moment beneath the softening morning sky, two lives reshaped by a single soldier's dying wish. Then Daniel stepped back, giving Alexandra space to take in the weight and wonder of the day. As he walked away down the quiet street, wind stirring gently around him, Alexandra remained still, the letter and the notebook page pressed against her heart. She looked toward the horizon where sunlight spilled gold across the rooftops. The world felt different now, less sharp, more forgiving. A soldier had entered her office seeking one favor. And in granting it, Alexandra Holt had found a piece of herself she thought was gone forever. James Alder's legacy lived on, not in medals, not in headlines, but in the fragile, courageous truth he left behind. A truth that restored connections, shattered walls, and lit the path toward something redemptive. And as the wind chimes sang softly behind her, Alexandra whispered into the quiet morning, "Thank you, James. You changed everything."